What's going on, guys? It's the Draft Nerd, and I'm bringing you guys my new updated top 10 wide receivers in the 2024 NFL Draft. I hope you guys are excited as I am, and just to preface the video, this receiver class is stacked. I'm only doing my top 10, so there's inevitably going to be guys outside of my top 10 that you think should be in the top 10. This list is subjective. This isn't my final rankings. I'll have my final rankings in April, but this is a good way to kind of just see where I'm at right now. So be easy on me in the comments, and without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, coming in at number 10, I do have Xavier Legette, and he's fallen a bit for me over the past few months, mainly because at the Senior Bowl, he did come in an inch or two shorter than he was listed as throughout the season. During my last rankings, I was under the assumption that Xavier Legette was around 6'3", 230 pounds. He measured in at the Senior Bowl at 6'1", 223 pounds. So, he's still that rocked up solid guy, but, for his play style, 6'1" is a bit on the shorter side, because what you're going to want Xavier Legette to be is kind of what a guy like DK Metcalf and AJ Brown are in the NFL. Guys that are, primarily outside guys, especially a guy like DK Metcalf, who run, vertical routes, comeback routes, a curl route, maybe a 10-yard out. Like, their route tree is not going to be that complex, and I think that's what Xavier Legette's role is going to be in the NFL. In 2023, he finished the season with 71 receptions for 1,255 yards, 7 touchdowns. So he had a solid year of production. The only problem is that was his only year of production. He was mainly a special teams like gunner in the years prior. And the only reason he really got a chance was, one, South Carolina was very thin at the wide receiver position, with guys like Juice Wells being injured for most of the season. And so that's really why he got his, opportunity. And I'm not going to take anything away from him. He took that opportunity and ran with it. And I still think Xavier Legette's a solid day 2 option for a team. But I don't know if he's a first-round caliber guy. Or at least for me personally, he's not a first-round caliber guy. I like him a little bit more in the back end of round 2, which this wide receiver class is stacked. So even though he's ranked number 10, I still think he's a a second-round player. That just shows how stacked this wide receiver class is. So yeah, I think Xavier Legette has really good body control when he goes up for contested catches. I think he's gonna run very fast for a guy who is as big as he is. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he runs in the 4.3s, maybe like late 4.3s, 4.38, 4.39. And like I said, his size, although he did come in a little bit smaller, he's still got good size for the receiver position in general. The only things I worry about is, one, his production. He's kind of a one-hit wonder as of right now. Obviously, you look back at other years prior to just, his past season. But for the NFL, it is kind of a what have you done lately for me type of leagues. So I don't know, production's a little bit of a concern for me, but it's not a massive one. The only other thing is his route running. He doesn't have the best footwork. He's not the most nuanced route runner. And that's why I said earlier that he's more of that DK Metcalf build, where he's going to run go routes, he's going to run comebacks, he's going to run curls, and that's about it. Like, you want him running that type of route tree. And if a team drafts him to do that, I think he could end up being a guy like a DK Metcalf or AJ Brown, because people forget DK Metcalf was drafted in the back end of the second round. Like, he wasn't the first, second, or third receiver taken in the draft, and he's still an elite Pro Bowl level receiver. So I think Xavier Legette could maybe reach that one day, but as of what I see on film right now, I think he's the 10th best receiver. Moving on to number 9, I do have Jaylen Pul, the wide receiver out of Washington, and he's a 6'2", 204-pound receiver, so he's a bit on the bigger end. But I'd be surprised if he comes into the draft combine at 6'2". I think he's more 6'1", maybe even, 6'1.5". I don't think he's quite 6'2". But in 2023, he put up 69 receptions for 9 touchdowns and 1,159 yards. So a really solid season, especially when you got to think he played behind a guy like Rome Odunze, who, spoiler alert, we're going to get to him a little bit later. I think Jaylen Pul has the opportunity to be a very versatile receiver at the next level. I think he could play in the slot. I think he could play on the outside. I don't think he's going to be pigeonholed into one area of the field, and I don't think he was in college either. I believe he had like a 48% slot percentage or something like that. So he showed that he can play in the slot, but he can also play outside as well. And if he does live up to that 6'2" height come combine, I think he can play on the outside as well. So Moving on to some of his pros, I think he might have, top 2 hands in the NFL draft. I mean, I believe he only dropped 1 ball last year on like 109 targets. So he's got, really solid hands, and, he was targeted a bunch downfield, and, he didn't have any drops. He was reeling everything in. He was making diving catches. He was making, catches in traffic. Like, he has really solid hands. He also is really good on deep routes. Like I said, he's a deep threat receiver. He was targeted a lot downfield, and he doesn't have blazing speed. Like, he's not going to light the combine up with a 40-yard dash. He gets more open downfield due to his release package. He has a very good release package. He has that diamond release down pat, and he's he's just really creative with his releases, and I think that's how he gets open most of the time. Because as you can see, as one of my cons, I do have his route running in general. I seen that he was a really lackadaisical when he was running double moves. He had a really hard time like actually selling his double moves, so that's a pretty decent concern for me. I think one of the reasons he had a hard time selling his double moves was he has stiff hips. I think he's a shifty receiver when it comes to the line of scrimmage, but he has a hard time, turning his hips and making, the necessary, shifty route running combinations. Like, if you want him to run like an in and up, make a double move, like, I think he struggles with that a bit. But besides that, I think he could easily go early day 2. I wouldn't be shocked if he go day 1. I think there's 8 receivers ahead of him. So unless there's 9 receivers in the first round, which is highly doubtful, I think he's a really solid day 2 option for a team, maybe like the Panthers, who pick at the top of the second round, or maybe a team like the Giants or Titans if they pass on a receiver in the first round. I think he could be a really solid option for them, and I think he could be a number 2 receiver in the NFL. I don't know if he has number 1 receiver upside, but I think he could be a really, really solid wide receiver 2 for a team. Coming in at number 8, I have Ladd McConkey, the receiver out of Georgia, and he came in at the Senior Bowl at 5'11", 187 pounds, so, he's definitely a slot guy. And in 2023, he was a bit banged up. He only had 30 receptions for 478 yards and 2 touchdowns, but for the tape he put on in this short amount of time in 2023, he really put on display his route running ability. I think he's the best route runner in this class, period. I don't think anyone really comes close. The way he's able to get in and out of his breaks is special. And when you see him, obviously you see the picture. He's a white guy, and usually with white receivers, you kind of picture the Julian Edelman, Danny Amendola, Wes Welker type of build. But I think Ladd McConkey's substantially more athletic than guys like that. I think he has, obviously the route running ability, he's elite, but he can also make a guy miss, and he can also get really shifty after the catch, and you can, run end arounds for him and things like that as well. He's just a playmaker in my opinion. Now, as some of the cons, I do have his size. He's sub 6 foot, so he's going to be pigeonholed into the slot, but I think he could be a really, really solid slot player in the NFL. And especially at the Senior Bowl, you could see that when cornerbacks would play a little bit more physical with him, he had a hard time getting off of that press coverage, and obviously that's going to be a problem. But when you're in the slot, you don't face a lot of press coverage, so I think teams will be able to work with his strengths while kind of hiding some of his weaknesses. So as long as he gets to a team that is smart, I think he's going to thrive in that slot and be one of the top slot receivers in the NFL one day, in my opinion. Moving on to number 7, I have Adarius Mitchell, the receiver out of Texas. And it pains me to put him at number 7 because I have him as a first-round caliber receiver. I think he's a potential number 1 receiver in the NFL, but this class is just so stacked with talent that I had to put him at number 7. He's a 6'4" receiver, 196 pounds, so a bit on the slimmer side. And in 2023, he put up 55 receptions for 845 yards and 11 touchdowns. And so he's not the most, productive guy ever. He never had, the most productive season in college. He battled injuries a bit earlier in his career and stuff like that. So you haven't really seen him have a breakout superstar caliber year yet. But he's an amazing red zone threat, obviously with that 6'4" frame. He has really solid hands, and for his size, He has some amazing footwork, and he can really create separation due to his route running ability, which you don't really see with 6'4" receivers just because they're a bit bigger and they have, a bit of a harder time getting in and out of breaks. But for a guy his size, A.D. Mitchell is a really good technician. Again, some of the cons I do have is his health. He hasn't had the most production of all time, and I don't think he's that dynamic of a threat after the catch. But for a 6'4" guy, potentially an X receiver at the next level, you're not really looking for a guy who can, create magic after the catch. You can leave that to guys like Ladd McConkey, who we just talked about earlier. The guys that can get those short passes and, try to make something happen with it. That's just not A.D. Mitchell's game, but he's an amazing red zone threat. And I mean, I hate to put a comp on him, especially this early. And again, I have him as my number 7 receiver, but he does give me shades of CeeDee Lamb. I don't think he'll ever reach that type of level that CeeDee Lamb's on in the NFL, but he could be a lesser version of a CeeDee Lamb at the next level. He kind of gives me shades of a guy like CeeDee Lamb. So, again, I'm really high on A.D. Mitchell. It doesn't really seem like it because he's my number 7 receiver, but I could see the Chiefs or the Bills taking him in the back end of the first round easily. All right, coming in at number 6, I do have Keon Coleman, the receiver out of Florida State. And Keon Coleman's had an interesting process this past year. He started off the kind of process during summer scouting as a lot of people's number 2 or 3 receivers in the class. And it seems like now he's really fallen off of people's boards as some people's number 8, 9, 10 receiver, especially guys over at NFL Stock Exchange. They're, substantially lower than most people on Keon Coleman. They have him as like their 8th receiver. And I think I'm just, right dab in the middle. I really like Keon Coleman. I think he's an amazing contested catch guy, but I do have concerns on his route running and separation. In 2023, he had 50 receptions, 658 yards, 11 touchdowns. So his production was held back a little bit just by Florida State's offense. They had so many weapons, and I don't think Jordan Travis did the best job distributing the ball. So I wouldn't, look too much into his production as a concern. But like I said, he's an amazing contested catch guy. He's that type of guy who you can just, throw a prayer up, and he could turn those 50-50 balls more into 80-20 balls. And, more likely than not, he's going to bring those balls down. He's also really athletic for his 6'4", 215-pound frame. If you look up Keon Coleman highlights, he's going to look like the best receiver of all time. He has highlights of him hurdling guys. He has highlights of him going up and just snagging balls out of the air with one hand. He has some amazing highlights, but if you take a deeper dive into his film, you do see that he's just not the best separator. I think it has a lot to do with maybe his footwork and his kind of, his just nuance, because like I said, he's a really athletic guy for 6'4", 215 pounds. But he just doesn't create much separation, and he did struggle with an injury, and that might have been the reason why. But from what I've seen, he just struggled to separate, and that scares me at the next level because, he can go up and get contested balls, but you got to be able to separate a little bit in the NFL to be a high-level receiver, and I just have questions about that. But like I said, I wouldn't be mad if a team took him at the back end of round 1. I really like his fit with the Bills. Having him play alongside Stephon Diggs and having Josh Allen have that threat to where he could just, make those dumb throws where he just throws in the triple coverage. But with a guy like Keon Coleman, he could bring those balls down. So I really like him in the Bills scheme, but I think he's a back end of the first round, early day 2 type of guy for me. Are you ready to master the art of NFL draft scouting like never before? Introducing the ultimate playbook for football enthusiasts and aspiring scouts alike, the NFL Draft Scouting Report Guide. From dissecting game tape to deciphering player statistics, this guide covers it all. Whether you're a seasoned analyst or just starting out, the NFL Draft Scouting Report Guide's step-by-step approach will elevate your scouting game to new heights. But that's not all. With access to position-by-position scouting report templates, you'll be able to break down NFL draft prospects like the pros. Plus, create your very own NFL Draft Big Board. Ready to put your skills to the test? Dive into interactive exercises and player evaluations designed to sharpen your scouting instincts. Don't just watch the draft, be a part of the action. Order your copy of the NFL Draft Scouting Report Guide today and join the ranks of elite scouts in the NFL community. Visit NFL Draft Bookstore on Shopify with the link on the screen or in the description to get your hands on this must-have guide. Moving on to number 5, I do have my guy, Troy Franklin, the receiver out of Oregon, and this is my favorite prospect in the draft. Obviously, I don't think he's the best prospect in the draft, but he is my favorite, and I've been high on Troy Franklin this whole process. I was really fighting to put him at number 4, but I just couldn't quite squeeze him into the top 4. You'll see who I have above him, but again, he's 6'3", 187 pounds, so not the biggest guy in the world. And in 2023, he had a really productive season with 81 receptions, 1,383 yards, and 14 touchdowns. He was definitely Bo Nix's, number one guy. And, that Oregon offense definitely made it easy for him, but that doesn't take away from his ability to separate. He's one of the better separators in this class. I think he's one of the better deep threats in this class because he has a good mix of speed, smooth route running ability, and contested catch ability. Although he is only 187 pounds, he can go up and get the ball over defensive backs. The only things I worry about with Troy Franklin is, one, his weight, which I think is a little bit overrated in today's NFL. The game's a lot less physical than it used to be. You don't have to be 6'4", 230 pounds to play the receiver position anymore. You see guys like Devontae Smith in the NFL, guys like Tank Dell. There's a lot of guys who have succeeded early on being sub 200 pounds. I do expect Troy Franklin to put on about 5 to 10 pounds. I think he will come into the combine at hopefully 195. I would be really happy with that. And also in the film, you could see that he was a bit bothered by more physical defensive backs, which is, expected with a guy his size. But overall, I think he's a really solid guy. I personally would draft him in the first round. I don't think the NFL's, as high on him as I am. But I would love for a team like the Chiefs or Bills to draft him. I think he would be an amazing option. And if he gets drafted to a team like the Chiefs, I think he would be a number 1 receiver for him. Moving on to number 4, I do have Brian Thomas, the receiver out of LSU. And he stands at 6'4", 205 pounds. So, again, a bit of a bigger receiver. And in 2023, he had 68 receptions for 1,177 yards and 17 touchdowns as the number 2 option on the team. Amazing stuff, amazing production. And I'm really high on Brian Thomas, but I will admit he is definitely a boom or bust type of prospect because he just has all the things you want to look for that you can't teach. The size, the speed, the physicality. He has all the things you like to see. But when you look, a little bit deeper into more of the nuanced things in his game, I think he has a lot of focus drops. Or I don't want to say a lot, but they do pop up here and there on his film, and that's, you never really want to see that. He also has only had 1 year of production, similar to a guy like Xavier Legette and Adarius Mitchell. And then also, I don't think he's the best route runner. Again, he is 6'4", 205 pounds, so you don't really expect that from him. But I don't think he can run, a full route tree yet. I think, again, a guy like Xavier Legette, he's going to be running deep balls, cutbacks, curls, 10-yard outs. He's going to run a simple route tree, but he's going to be really effective in doing that. I wouldn't be surprised if he ran something crazy at the combine, 4.3 or something like that. He is fast for his size. He's a long strider. He has deceptive speed. He's not the twitchiest or most, quick guy, but he is fast. And so, again, I think he's a top 20 pick. I think he's a top 20 player in this class. And, I wouldn't be mad with a team like the Dolphins or maybe the Bengals drafting him as a T. Higgins replacement. I like him better as the number 2 receiver on a team, but if a team drafts him to be their number 1 guy, I think he has the potential to do that. Moving on to number 3, I have Rome Odunze, the receiver out of Washington. And, when I did these rankings about 3-4 months ago, I did have Rome Odunze as my 4th receiver, and you guys crucified me for it. You guys did not like his ranking. You did not like, what I had as his cons. But I've grown to like Rome Odunze a little bit more now. He's 6'3", 215 pounds, and in 2023, he put up 92 receptions for 1,640 yards and 13 touchdowns. So, production, definitely there. And with a guy like Rome Odunze, he's a big athletic guy. He's got great speed, great agility for his size, and he can also, create separation with his route running ability. As one of the cons I had 4 months ago, I had his contested catch ability, and that was just because prior to this year, he did struggle with his, physicality at the catch point. He's cleaned that up a lot. He's improved at that, just greatly. He put on display, contested catch after contested catch. And so, I fully took that out of his cons. I don't think he's, quite elite at contested catch and physicality at the catch point, but it's definitely not a concern by any means. The only really concern I have for a guy like Rome Odunze is his after the catch ability. He's not dynamic by any means after the catch, but I'm not worried about that. If I'm drafting Rome Odunze, I'm drafting him top 10 first of all, and I'm drafting him to be my number one guy and just a guy to, get open and catch touchdowns. That's about it. I think Rome Odunze would be a really fun option for maybe like the Falcons or the Bears, at that 8th or 9th pick. And I wouldn't bat an eye at that. I think Rome Odunze doesn't, it's weird to have Rome Odunze as a third best receiver in any other draft class. I think in last year's class, I would draft him ahead of guys like Jordan Addison, JSN, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers. Rome Odunze, if he was in last year's class, would be my number one receiver. That's how good he is. And once we get to the next two guys, I think both those guys are number one receivers in 90% of draft classes. So with that being said, I'm going to go to my number two guy, which is Malik Nabers. It sucks so bad that Malik Nabers is in this class because he deserves number one receiver recognition. I think in, again, 80 to 90% of draft classes, he's a number one receiver. It just so happens that there's a generational talent at my number one spot, and we'll get to him a little bit later. But with Malik Nabers, he's the receiver at LSU, 6 foot, 195 pounds, so not the biggest guy. And in 2023, put up 89 receptions for 1,569 yards and 14 touchdowns. So a really productive season alongside Brian Thomas Jr. And as some of his pros I have, he's an amazing athlete. He can get open with the best of them. He's on par with a guy like Ladd McConkey. I think Ladd McConkey's the best, separator and route runner, but Malik Nabers isn't too far behind. And where he really shines is after the catch. Once he gets the ball into his hands, I'm not going to say he's a Deebo Samuel type of guy, but he is a Steve Smith type of guy. And for those of you who are a bit too young or don't quite remember Steve Smith, he would turn 5-yard catches into 20-yard catches just due to his effort and willingness to, work for the yards. And I think that's what Malik Nabers is. I don't think he's a guy who is like a running back with the ball in his hands like Deebo Samuel, but he's going to get you some extra yards no matter what. And you got to love that with a guy like Malik Nabers. Some of the cons I do have is his weight. He's going to be on the smaller side. I would be surprised if he hits that 6 foot mark. I think he might be more like 5'11 and a half, maybe 195. He might get to 200. And I also don't think, again, this is definitely nitpicking. Like I said, he would be a number one receiver in 90% of draft classes, but I do think he could be a little bit more physical during his route. And that might just be because he is a bit on the smaller side, but I don't think it's a big problem. I think he can still play slot. I think he can play on the outside. I think he can play anywhere. And maybe I'm a little bit biased because I'm a Giants fan, but I think he could be on the same, stratosphere as a guy like Odell Beckham. And I know that's a lazy comp just because, they both went to LSU, but the similarities are there, whether you want to, like it or not, they're there. And I think he could be a guy like Odell Beckham at the next level, Odell Beckham, he had that crazy one-hand catch, which kind of put him on a different stratosphere. But if you just look at their games when they're both at LSU, they look somewhat similar. You can't really deny that. So I think Malik Nabers isn't going to get past the 6th pick. Again, having a receiver go top 5 and probably not even being the first receiver off the board is crazy to say, but I think he could go as early as top 5 to to a team like the Chargers. That wouldn't be, mind blowing to me. But I do hope he falls to the Giants. I'm not gonna lie. But coming in at number 1, somewhat unsuspenseful, is Marvin Harrison Jr. He's been my number 1, since I laid eyes on him. He's just on another level. He's the receiver out of Ohio State. He's 6'4", 205 pounds, so amazing size. In 2023, he kind of had a down year with 67 receptions, 1,211 yards, and 14 touchdowns. And the only reason I say he had a down year was because Kyle McCord could have definitely done a better job at getting this guy the ball. I think if he had a more compatible quarterback, he would have had a way bigger season. And even with that being said, he was in Heisman contention. So, that just goes to show how good this guy is. Any pros I had for any of the other receivers applies to this guy. The only con, and this is really nitpicky, is after the catch, he's not, overly dynamic. Like, he'll catch the ball and get upfield quick, but he's not going to make a guy miss. He's not going to, make any highlight plays after the catch, but he will definitely make his fair share of highlight plays in the NFL, with his catch and with his route running ability. He's got amazing body control, and on a lot of his catches, he just seems to be able to get his foot in bounds. Like, there's some catches where you're like, there's no way he got a foot in bounds, and, he got 2 feet in bounds. Obviously at the college level, you only need 1 foot, but, a lot of his catches, he gets 2 feet down when it looks almost impossible to do so. So, he's got really good body control, really good awareness of where the sideline is. Again, he's obviously got really good size, and he takes after his father with his route running ability. Again, he's 6'4", 205 pounds, so you got to take that into account. But if you take that into account, his route running ability is elite. He's no Ladd McConkey because he's a whole 5 inches taller than Ladd McConkey, but, amazing route runner. He's probably, as soon as he gets drafted, he's going to be a top 10 receiver in the NFL, in my opinion. And a lot of people don't want to say that because it seems a bit of an overreaction, but I really believe it. Just like I said with Bijan Robinson last year, when he gets drafted, he's a top 10 running back in the league. This applies to Marvin Harrison Jr. He's the best receiver I've seen since probably Jamar Chase, which was, 4 years ago. So, again, I hate throwing this word around, but he is, in my opinion, a generational prospect. And we're going to leave it off at that. I think he could be the number 1 pick. I know a lot of Bears fans might want that, but I do ultimately think he's going to be a top 5 pick 100%. If he gets past the 4th pick, I'd be shocked. And that just goes to show how good he is. So, with that being said, that is my list. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Once we get a little bit closer to draft time, probably in April, I will be giving a top 15, probably maybe even top 20 receiver rankings. But we just try to stick to 10. And obviously, I know there's gonna be people asking like, oh, where's Jermaine Burton, or where's Johnny Wilson, Xavier Worthy? Like, just wait. I will get my rankings. I will, give you my top 15, top 20. And this receiver class is really good. There's gonna be guys that aren't in the top 10 that would be, in the top 10 in most other years. Like, this is a stacked class, so you got to keep that in mind when you're looking at these rankings. But with that being said, make sure you like the videos, consider subscribing if you like the content, and as always, I'm the Draft Nerd, and thanks for watching.